When the Sapphire Protocol is engaged, there is no room for error and no time for second-guessing your own heart. Experience the intensity of a high-tech operation where every choice determines the fate of millions. Hit subscribe now and enter the secure zone of cinematic storytelling today.
I am not wearing my coat. No stethoscope. No badge with a little MD after my name. No hospital-issued lanyard. No pager clip to my waist. I am in jeans, a plain gray pullover, and the kind of worn-in sneakers you wear when your feet have earned the right to breathe. My hair is in a low bun that I twisted up in the car. I look like someone's tired aunt who just came from a Costco run. That is exactly the point. The hospital system I work for, I'll call it Meridian Health, had been under review for 8 months. Patient billing complaints, insurance irregularities. A whistleblower complaint filed quietly by someone in the billing department who then, coincidentally, took a leave of absence. HR said it was personal. I had my doubts. I'd been asked by the board to do an internal walkthrough, not in my official capacity as chief of surgery at the main campus, but as a set of eyes. Unofficial, unannounced. The kind of visit that makes administrators sweat and reveals what the place actually looks like when no one thinks anyone important is watching. I requested a day off. I drove myself. I parked in the visitor garage. I walked into the East Wing Outpatient Center at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning, and I sat down in the waiting room like any other patient's family member. The waiting room smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. The chairs were those connected plastic ones in a row, the kind that ensure you can never get truly comfortable, which I've always suspected is intentional. There was a television mounted too high on the wall playing the morning news segment about property taxes. 3 people were seated across from me, all staring at their phones. An older gentleman in the corner was filling out paperwork with a golf pencil, squinting without his glasses. I had a clipboard on my lap with a notepad. I was writing things down as if I was waiting. I was waiting. I was also watching. The desk at the far end of the room had 2 people working it, a woman in her 50s who I recognized, vaguely, from a staffing meeting 2 years ago. Calm, efficient, moved with the easy confidence of someone who had been doing this exact job for a long time. And a young man, he looked maybe 24. 25 at a stretch. He had the kind of haircut that took effort to appear effortless, that slightly pushed back, product-heavy style. His scrubs were fitted in a way that suggested he had purchased them himself rather than taking the standard issue ones from the supply closet. He was wearing a smartwatch that cost more than most of the people in this waiting room made in a week. I noticed all of that in the first 30 seconds. I've spent 20 years reading rooms. A woman came in through the side door holding a toddler on her hip and a canvas bag that was sliding off her shoulder. She was trying to manage the door, the child, and the bag all at once, while also clearly looking for the check-in desk. The older woman at the desk was on the phone, turned slightly away. The young man was standing right there, not on a call, not with a patient, doing what appeared to be absolutely nothing except leaning against the counter, scrolling through something on his phone. The woman with the toddler caught his eye and smiled, the universal expression of someone asking for a small grace. "Hi, sorry, is this where I check in for the imaging center?" He looked up. He looked at her bag, still sliding. He looked at the child who was grabbing at his mother's collar. He looked back at his phone. "You'll want to follow the blue line on the floor," he said. "Imaging's down the hall." She nodded. She thanked him. He had already looked back at his screen. She had not asked for directions. She had asked if she was in the right place to check in. She was in the right place. He had sent her away rather than help her take one step to the right and reach the desk. I wrote that down. About 40 minutes later, I got up to refill my coffee from the cart near the window. There was a small cluster of chairs in that corner, and a man was sitting there alone, probably mid-70s, reading glasses on a chain, the kind of hands that said he had worked with them all his life. He had a paper coffee cup and he was eating a granola bar very slowly, in the methodical way of someone who has been told to eat something before a procedure and is not particularly happy about it. The young man from the desk, I'll call him the new coordinator because that is what his badge said, Patient Services Coordinator, walked past him on his way to the break room. The older man looked up. "Excuse me, son, my appointment was at 9. They told me the doctor was running about 20 minutes late. That was an hour ago. Is there any update?" The new coordinator paused, but not in the way you pause to actually consider a question. He paused the way you pause when something has interrupted your forward momentum and you need a second to recalibrate. "I don't have access to scheduling from out here," he said. "You'd have to go back to the desk." "I was at the desk. They sent me over here. Then someone at the desk told you they'd come get you when they're ready." "Right, but..." "Sir, I really can track individual appointments. If you want an update, the desk is the place for that. He started walking again before the sentence was finished. The older man sat back. He looked at his granola bar. He took another small, careful bite. I wrote that down too. I had been there 2 hours when I needed to use the restroom. On my way back through the main corridor, I took a slightly wrong turn, intentionally, and ended up in the administrative hallway that runs behind the outpatient center. It is the kind of hallway that patients are not supposed to be in, but there are no signs saying so, and the door is never locked, which I had also always considered a problem. The new coordinator was in that hallway. He was talking to another young man, same age, same energy, same approximate investment in his appearance, in a low, conspiratorial voice. I slowed down. I have learned over the years that the best information is the information people share when they assume no one is listening. Told her the authorization hadn't cleared, the new coordinator was saying. She sat there for 4 hours. By the time someone figured it out, she'd already rescheduled herself. Did it actually not clear? It cleared 2 days ago. We just hadn't updated the system. But Harlow said to hold off on calling people back in because they're trying to keep the daily volume down while the review is happening. I stopped walking. Harlow was the name of the regional operations director for this division, a man I had met exactly twice, both times in large meetings. Both times I had come away with the specific, undefinable feeling that something about his explanations was slightly too smooth. He said that? The other man asked. He said to prioritize scheduled slots for patients with premium insurance classifications first, and anyone on Medicaid or the standard state plan. Just let the wait extend. I was completely still. That's not, the other man started. I know. I told him it felt weird. He said it was a capacity management strategy and it was above my pay grade to question it. I walked away before they saw me. My footsteps were very even and very quiet on the linoleum. I sat back down in the waiting room and I did not write anything on my clipboard for a while. I just sat there with my coffee going cold in my hands, thinking about the woman with the toddler who had been sent down the wrong hallway. Thinking about the older man eating his granola bar alone, waiting on a doctor who was already free. Thinking about how many people had been strategically delayed. Not because the clinic was overwhelmed, but because someone had decided their insurance classification made them a lower priority. I thought about 20 years of medical school and residency and the oath I had taken in a hall that smelled like old wood and nervous sweat. I thought about the whistleblower who had taken a leave of absence. Then I took up my phone and I made a call. The call was to a woman I'll describe only as someone who reports directly to the board and who had been waiting for exactly this kind of information. I told her what I had heard. I told her the name. I told her I would put it in writing within the hour. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you still there?" "I'm still in the waiting room." "Stay. Don't leave until you've documented everything you observed today with timestamps." I said I would. And I meant it. I went back to the desk around noon. The efficient woman in her 50s, whose name tag said Lorraine, was eating a sandwich at her station, which told me everything I needed to know about how short-staffed this desk was. The new coordinator was there too, now actually doing what appeared to be some form of work, entering something into the system with more attention than he had shown anyone all morning. I approached the desk and asked, mildly, whether the imaging center check-in could be done from this location. A perfectly ordinary question. The new coordinator looked up. He gave me the same look he had given every other unremarkable adult who had approached this desk all day. Imaging is separate. Down the hall, follow the blue line. Even for patients who checked in here originally, if you have imaging, you need to check in at imaging. They have their own system. Lorraine, without looking up from her sandwich, said quietly, "If you pull up the account from here, you can flag her as arrived and they'll see her in the queue." He looked at her. A flash of something, not quite annoyance, but close to it. "That's not the standard process. It's the process we use when patients don't want to make 2 trips, she said, still not looking up. "Which is most of them." He turned back to me. He had already decided something about me. The jeans, the gray pullover, the worn sneakers. He had filed me into a category somewhere around not worth the extra step. It's really easier if you just walk down there yourself. It's not far. I looked at him for a moment. "What's your name?" I asked. Something shifted in his expression. Not alarm? Not yet. More like mild recalibration. Connor. I nodded. "How long have you been in this role?" "About 6 weeks. A small adjustment in posture. Is there a problem?" "I'm not sure yet," I said pleasantly. Then I smiled at Lorraine, thanked her, and walked back to my corner chair. At 1:47 in the afternoon, a woman came through the main entrance. I recognized her because I had worked alongside her for 9 years. She is the director of patient relations for the entire Buridian system, and she does not make casual appearances at outpatient centers on Tuesday afternoons. She was followed by two people I did not know, both in business dress, both carrying the specific kind of folio that suggests they take notes for a living. She looked around the waiting room. She found me. She did not acknowledge me in any way that would mean something to an observer. A slight nod, the smallest angle of her chin, the kind of signal that only works between people who have been colleagues for almost a decade. She walked to the desk. I watched Connor watch her approach. He straightened slightly. Her demeanor, the walk, the quality of her attention, communicated authority in a way that is hard to fake and impossible to ignore. He was already recalibrating. "Good afternoon," she said. "I'm here for an unannounced operational review. I'll need to speak with whoever is the senior staff member on duty." Lorraine stood up immediately. Connor said, "I can help you. What is this regarding?" "Senior staff member on duty," she repeated, not unkindly but without any softness either. Lorraine said, "That's me. I'm the senior patient services specialist." She looked at Connor for just a half second, and in that half second, I saw every morning of 6 weeks of small indignities pass across her face in a single blink. They moved to the back. Connor stayed at the desk. I don't know exactly what he did in the next few minutes. I wasn't watching him directly. I was writing, but I heard him make a phone call low and fast, and I heard the word Harlow, and I heard the word review, and I heard the word review, and I heard the word now. 20 minutes later, a man came through the administrative hallway door. Tall, early 50s, the particular energy of someone who has spent his career convincing rooms that he is the most competent person in them. He was pulling on his jacket as he walked, which meant he had come from somewhere he hadn't expected to leave quickly. He looked at the desk. He looked at the waiting room. His eyes landed on me for approximately 1 second and moved on. He knocked on the door that my colleague had disappeared through. He went inside. I sat in that waiting room for another 40 minutes. I drank bad coffee. I watched Lorraine come back out and return to her desk, where she answered 2 phone calls and helped a man find the paperwork for a dependent's prescription coverage with the kind of quiet, unhurried competence that takes years to build and goes unnoticed until it's gone. Connor stood at the far end of the counter. He was not on his phone anymore. At 2:31, my colleague came back out. This time, the 2 note-takers were behind her, and so was Harlow. And the particular quality of his posture had changed in the way that postures change when someone has been informed of something they were not prepared to hear. She walked directly to me. She said, "Thank you for your time today. We have everything we need." I stood up. I picked up my clipboard and my cold coffee cup. I looked at Connor, who was watching us, and I could see the exact moment when the mat started to rearrange itself in his head. The woman in the gray pullover and the worn sneakers, the clipboard all morning, the questions about names and process. The director who had walked in and walked straight to her. He said slowly, "I'm sorry. Who are you?" My colleague answered before I could. She said my name and my title and my role on the board review committee. The color in his face did not drain exactly. It rearranged. I said, "The older gentleman who was waiting since 9, did someone follow up with him?" Connor looked at the desk. He looked back at me. He did not answer. Lorraine said from her station, "I called back to the clinic. He was seen at 11:40. He's home." "Thank you, Lorraine," I said. I left the building. The afternoon air was cold and clean and smelled like nothing in particular, which after several hours of burnt coffee and industrial cleaner felt like an enormous gift. In the weeks that followed, the review expanded. What had started as a billing irregularity became something considerably larger. The selective delay strategy, the one I had overheard described in the administrative hallway as a capacity management strategy, was traced not just to this outpatient center, but to 3 additional locations in the same regional division. In each case, patients on Medicaid, or standard state insurance plans, had been systematically deprioritized during periods of high demand. Not turned away, just delayed. Made to wait longer than their paperwork explained. Made to feel, without anyone saying so directly, that their time was less valuable. Harlow had implemented it 14 months earlier, framed internally as a resource optimization measure, and had apparently ensured that the framing stayed far away from anyone with the authority to push back on it. The whistleblower in the billing department, the one who had taken the leave of absence, had flagged the pattern in appointment data 6 months before anyone listened. She was one of the first people I asked to speak with when the formal review began. She was careful, and she was precise, and she had kept records the way people keep records when they know what they know, and they know that knowing it is going to cost them something. She had kept them anyway. I thought about that. I thought about it a lot in the months that followed. Harlow resigned before the review concluded. The official language was mutually agreed departure, which is the language organizations use when they want the situation to resolve without becoming a headline. 3 of the 4 outpatient locations implemented new patient services protocols. The 4th was restructured entirely under new management. Connor was let go at the end of his probationary period. Not for any single thing I had documented. None of what I had written on my clipboard that morning was, by itself, a terminable offense. But probationary reviews are comprehensive, and Lorraine had been a senior patient services specialist for 11 years. And her assessment of his performance was thorough and honest in the way that assessments are, when someone has been waiting for the right moment to be thorough and honest about something. I don't know what he's doing now. I genuinely hope he found a role somewhere that is teaching him what it means to pay attention to the person in front of you. I hope someone is patient enough to do that, but I also think about Lorraine still, every time I walk through that East Wing. How she sat there for 11 years, being quietly excellent while the people who looked like they belonged in a certain kind of role walked past her and over her, and to her, and she just kept answering the phone and helping the man with the prescription paperwork and calling back to the clinic too. Make sure the older gentleman got seen. I think about how many rooms there are in this industry and every other one full of Lorraines, people doing the actual work. People who have been there long enough to know where every blue line on the floor leads and exactly how to pull up an account, so a tired woman with a toddler doesn't have to make 2 trips. There is a kind of power that announces itself. It walks into rooms in fitted scrubs and a smartwatch and assumes that looking the part is most of the job. And then there is the other kind, the kind that sits quietly in a gray pullover in a plastic chair, drinking bad coffee and writing things down, watching everything, waiting. I have always preferred the second kind. I have been the second kind for a long time, and I have learned, more than once, that the people who mistake the gray pullover for a limitation have a very specific look on their face when they realize what was sitting in that waiting room all morning. I have seen that look enough times now that it no longer surprises me. But I will admit, just between us, that it never entirely stops being satisfying. I have thought about that Tuesday a lot since then. Not the dramatic parts, not the moment the director walked through the door, not the look on Connor's face when my name and title were said out loud in front of him. Those moments get the attention, but they are not actually where the story lives. The story lives in the hour before any of that, in the older gentleman sitting alone with his granola bar, eating it slowly because someone had told him to eat something before his procedure, and no one had thought to tell him his doctor was already free. In the woman with the toddler being pointed toward a blue line on the floor instead of helped to take 1 step to the right. In Lorraine, who knew the right answer every single time and kept giving it quietly to anyone who would listen, whether or not anyone with authority was in the room to notice. That is the part I keep coming back to. There is a version of Connor's story where none of this happens, where he decides in week 2 or week 3 that the work of actually paying attention to people is worth doing even when those people cannot do anything for him, where he watches Lorraine long enough to understand that her efficiency is not a personality quirk, but a skill built over 11 years of showing up and caring about the outcome. That version exists. He had access to it every single day he walked into that building. He chose differently. Not dramatically, not maliciously. Just through 1,000 small choices to look at his phone instead of the room, to redirect instead of help, to let someone else's wait extend because it was easier than doing the thing that was right in front of him to do. Those small choices accumulate. They always do. And they do not stay small. What happened to him was not the result of one bad morning. It was the result of 6 weeks of a pattern, documented not by me, but by his own behavior in front of people who were paying attention. Lorraine had been paying attention since day 1. I just happened to be there to provide the occasion for that attention to mean something. That is how accountability usually works in my experience. It is rarely a dramatic confrontation. It is usually a quiet accumulation of evidence that eventually reaches someone who has both the information and the authority to act on it. Harlow is a different kind of story. What he built, that system of quiet delay, of patience sorted by insurance classification into tiers of urgency, required persuading people below him that it was a rational strategy, that it was above their pay grade to question it. It required making sure the language never reached anyone who would recognize what it actually was. That kind of thing does not happen by accident. It takes work to obscure something that size, and it unravels the same way it was built. One careful person keeping records, one overheard conversation, one gray pullover in a waiting room chair, one phone call. I think about the whistleblower in the billing department often. She saw the pattern in the data 6 months before anyone listened. She filed the complaint and she took the leave of absence and she kept her records anyway, in the way you keep records when you know that knowing something is going to cost you and you decide the cost is worth it. That is not a small thing. That is the kind of decision that asks something real of a person. Moral clarity is easy to admire in retrospect. In the moment, it just feels like a choice between two kinds of hard. She chose the harder one, and it mattered. I have spent 20 years in operating rooms. I have learned that the outcome of any procedure depends less on the dramatic moments than on everything that was done correctly in the hours and days before. The preparation, the protocol, the 10,000 small decisions made by people who cared about the result even when no one was watching. That is true everywhere, not just in medicine. The work that holds things together is almost never the work that gets seen. Lorraine knew that. The whistleblower knew that. I have tried, for most of my career, to know it too. The gray pullover helps me remember.